Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's Christina here. Um, I did last week a live video and I just was like, tell me your questions and I'll come and answer them. And not many people turned up and asked many questions. So I just kind of talked about stuff that was happening for me and what I was doing and so on. But then at the end, Tanya asked a really amazing question, which was the gut-brain barrier and how does that all work and all of that type of stuff. And I thought, well, that would be a really good thing for me to come and talk about today. So I'm going to share with you a little bit from my book and a little bit about what's going into my book around this particular topic, because I think this is the perfect time of year to do it. So if you're on, say hi, let me know you're here. If you're drinking something special, let me know. I've got a bottle of water with me that I'm going to be sipping on. And these are my grapes. Do you like them? This is my front area of my house. And I'm on a 30-day live quest. So I'm going to do lives, Facebook lives for 30 days. And I have added to that quest that I want to do it with a beautiful background, and I want to get outside more because I want to spend more time outside. And that was part of our goal for 2021 or 2020, was that we were going to be traveling Australia. And because that didn't happen, we stayed in Tasmania, and it ended up being winter and all the things. We've spent quite a lot of time inside. So I'm going on this quest, doing my Facebook lives, which I want to do anyway, and I'm going to add to that to try and be outside more doing them. So this is my grapes at my front porch, and I've got a whole heap of them actually starting to grow, which is really exciting. This is the best it's done so far since being here, and it's exciting and fun for me. I love watching them. Like, I'm just seeing heaps and heaps of them hang down. So I'd love to know what you know about the gut-brain connection. What things do you already know about how the gut affects the brain and how the brain affects the gut? What things do you already know? Do you know much about that? Have you thought about that? The reason that I think that it would be a really good conversation to have this time of the year is that people are starting to make New Year's resolutions. They're starting to think about what they want to have for 2021, what they want to do, what they want to call in, all of those types of things. And it's quite a common time to do a cleanse. It's a common time to start a dietary program. It's a common time to actually start implementing some of those things. And so I think it's a really important time to talk about that as well, because what I often see, and this is what we talk about in Divinely Nourished, and will be absolutely in the book as well, is what I often see, and I know it because I've done it myself, is that we start the new year and we go, I'm going to lose this much weight. I'm going to only eat salads, or I'm going to only eat clean, or I'm only going to do this, this, and this. And we start off with the best of intentions. And we might have even signed up for a dietary program that we're going to follow, and it could be that we've signed up for counts or points or any of those other types of things that you could sign up for. And we have this plan to make it great. But when we think about dietary programs as just the food, we are absolutely limiting our potential to grow with them. So I see lots of people make these decisions that they're going to do the thing, and then they start the program, and then along the way they might start losing weight, they might start doing it really well, they've got lots of great improvements, all of that type of stuff. But somewhere along the track they start to go, I'll just have one, or I'll just have a little bit, or I'll just do this thing. And then before they know it, that little bit or that one or that thing has turned into a whole lot. And that whole lot has then turned into, them letting themselves down and actually starting to think that there's something wrong with them and all of that type of stuff. They set themselves up essentially for failure. And I see it happen over and over and over again, because we think of dietary programs and health as just the food that you put in your mouth. We've had this myth that's gone around for a really long time that energy in equals energy out. So if you want to lose weight, you have to put out more energy than what you're putting in. And it's a real misnomer, because we've tried to count it via calories, we've tried to count it via points, but that's not actually the truth of the situation, because everybody's body burns fuel at different rates. because of what's going on in their metabolic system. For some people, they've got a really high metabolic system and their thyroid is maybe extra, like it's overworking, and they could eat as much as they like, but they just can't seem to put on weight. For other people, they can almost eat nothing and they're still gaining weight. And it's all to do with their metabolism from the point of view of the calories in, calories out. Because it doesn't matter if you put 500 calories in and you're burning 800 calories, that doesn't actually equal. The equation is not that, because you don't know how many calories you're specifically burning, because your body is different and it's functioning differently to the standard metric that they've measured from some healthy people that they measured that by. So it's a flawed philosophy and it's a flawed ideology. The other thing too is that I have clients who are eating heaps of calories but are losing weight every single day, because the calories that they're putting in are ones that are filling up their nutrient stores, that their nutrient stores are getting full, their body is getting nourished, all of that amazing stuff is happening for them. And so they're continuing to lose weight because they're supporting their bodies really, really well. And they're listening to them. So when they're hungry, they're eating. When they're not hungry, they're not eating. And they're listening to their bodies, because your body will go through a period of time, especially on a healing diet. So GAPS, for example, is one of my favorite healing diets. In the beginning, all you want to do is eat. Eat. And, you know, my clients message me like, oh my God, I can't stop eating. Is there something wrong with me? I'm like, no, it's beautiful. It's amazing. Follow it. Keep doing it. Keep eating. Because what's actually happening is that their nutrient stores are starting to build up. And as their body starts to receive those nutrients, they're saying, just like Oliver, please, sir, can I have some more? And if we continue to give it more, it gets to the point where they start to get full. And then once that starts to get full, then what happens is that they don't necessarily need to bring in as much food anymore. Like they go, is it okay for me to just be eating like 2 meals a day and a light snack in the middle? Yeah, because your nutrient stores are full and your body's telling you that it doesn't need as much of that now. And it'll go through another cycle where you're hungry all the time, and then it'll go through another cycle where you're not so hungry. And as long as you follow that and you're authentically listening to that, you'll be okay. And when I say follow it and be authentic with it, I'm not saying don't do this with Tim Tams. Like you're never going to reach that place of feeling full with Tim Tams, because there's very little nutritional source for them. You're never going to reach that place by eating a lot of rice, because again, it has very little nutritional value for you. You need to be eating like the meats and the vegetables and your fermented dairies and your fermented vegetables. Like those are the ones that are going to do it. And especially if they're slow cooked, which is not always the desire in the middle of summer to want to eat soups and stews, but that's the way you do it. That's how you fill up those nutritional stores. So, gut-brain connection. The gut-brain connection, we talked about food, but the food is not the only thing, because I can say to you, go eat soups and stews and have a great time doing that, and you might start doing that and you might start seeing the results, and you might start then going, oh, this is amazing, I'm never going to not do this. And then suddenly you find yourself not doing this because the underlying belief there is that you're not allowed to have health, or you can't have money, health, and relationships, and you want money and you want relationships, or your money's going well and your relationship's going well, but you can't also be healthy. There's lots and lots of beliefs that we have that actually affect our choice in food. So if we have, and I've shared this before, that 2017 was the year that I was finishing my last lot of subjects and courses with naturopathy, and I was getting ready to graduate. And so I was like, yep, this year's going to be the year that I'm going to focus on my health. And by the end of the year, I got to about September, I was like, actually, this didn't go so well. I think I've gained more weight than I normally have. I've eaten definitely more crap. I've been focused, like, it's just like the Tim Tams want to walk into my mouth. And I'm using Tim Tams, anything, replace that with anything. And, you know, as I sat back and looked at that, I was going, what was going on there? And actually I started to recognize that I'd had some negative connotations about health, that I had developed some problems around that word health. And me focusing on health for a whole year wasn't going to serve me because of the beliefs that I had. And some of those beliefs were that, you know, health is deprivation, it's depriving, it's dry, it's boring, it's all of that type of stuff. But then also, as I start to dig deeper, one of the things that I found was I had some specific events around health as well. And one of those events was when I was left on life support. And so my body had internally created this belief that health equals actual death, because I was at my most healthiest before I went through that pregnancy that left me, you know, on life support for 7 days. I was at my most healthiest, and I can see logically, like, well, I know logically it was not the pregnancy, it was not me being healthy that created that situation. It just was the situation. It wasn't the pregnancy that created that. It just was the situation. And so I had to untangle that, because I see why my brain made that distinction. My brain made that distinction because it doesn't have all of the information. And so I had to clear that up for it. There's also some whole bunch of other things around that terminology of health and what I'm allowed to have. And if I looked at the cycles that I'd been brought up with, and many of you may have gone through these cycles too, where as you were a kid, you move from demand feeding to then being fed at a particular time of day, and you're fed particular types of food, and you get told that, you know, there are starving kids in Africa, and if you don't eat the food, you're essentially killing these starving kids in Africa. You're depriving them of food, which, you know, is not true. We get told all these types of stories. We also have things like dummies and pacifiers, where every time we're upset, something gets put in our mouth, and so once the pacifier is gone, it becomes food. So every time we're upset, we put food in our mouth. Like, there's a whole heap of cycles, tribal cycles, family cycles, cultural cycles that go into the play of that when it comes to our food culture. And so some of that is something you need to actually consider when you're trying to make these plans and these changes for yourself, especially in the new year, as you start to pick a diet that you want to follow or any of those types of things. You have to look at all of these areas, because what we think absolutely controls how our body functions. And if we think these things, like, for example, I had one client recently who said that taking away the food out of her life meant that she had no pleasure in her life anymore. And that for me is one of those moments where I go, okay, that's a problem with your life, not a problem with your diet. It's a problem with, let's make your life more enjoyable. Let's bring some pleasure and enjoyment in your life. If food is the only pleasure you have, then there's something wrong with your life that we need to fix. Like, that balance needs to be altered and created and changed so that you can have the health and fun and enjoyment and pleasure in your actual life. And so we all have different things like this. We all have those things from a mindset point of view. So our brain absolutely affects how our body does all of that type of stuff. But we also have a gut-brain connection from a microbial point of view as well. So the microbes that are living in our gut also affect how we think, how we feel, the neurochemicals that we actually make, all of that type of stuff. So if, for example, your microbiome is really out of balance, you're not going to be able to make a whole lot of serotonin. You're not going to be able to make a whole lot of dopamine. You're not going to be able to sleep super well, because if you can't make the serotonin, that can't lead into making great melatonin. So it actually affects how your brain functions on all of those things as well. And there's this huge cycle that goes on with all of this. The microbials affect the brain. So let's say if your gut microbiome is out of balance, then the likelihood is you're going to have things like candida living in there. You're going to have parasites living in there. Parasites, for example, if anybody had trouble sleeping for the last 3 nights, it's most likely parasites, because we've just had a full moon. And so they come alive in our digestive system the night before, the night of, and the night after the full moon. That's when they become really active in the digestive system. They're always active, but during that period of time, they're actually, I'm going to say it, they're having a mass orgy in your digestive system, because it's mating season. The moon signals to them that it's time to mate, and they come into the digestive system and they start to mate and reproduce, and then they lay their eggs, and then a whole new cycle of parasites comes about. That affects your nervous system. It affects how you sleep. You'll notice that kids who maybe don't normally wet the bed might wet the bed during the full moon. Kids who are maybe on the spectrum, their systems generally tend to be heightened over the full moon. Everybody tends to be a little bit more heightened over the full moon. All sorts of different things can happen. You might find that your sleep is more interrupted. You might find your kids are not sleeping so well. You might find that everybody's really grumpy around the full moon because of the parasitic behavior that's taking place. And so what's happening there in the gut is if those parasites are living in there, or there's candida living in there, they're going to send signals to your brain as well, because they want food. They want you to put in food that's going to feed them. And that, of course, is going to be things like your sugars. It is like your white wheats and your grains. It is like your rice and all of your white type of foods. Potatoes, those foods all feed those pathogenic bacteria, the parasites and the candida. They provide a food source for them, and they're very powerful at sending signals to the brain to go and do things. So, for example, I've had a number of kids whose families have started GAPS with me, and they've woken up in the middle of the night to find their 4-year-old in the middle of the kitchen floor eating spoonfuls of sugar out of the sugar bowl. So at like 3 a.m. they're like, somebody's in the house. And they go into the kitchen and it's just their 3-year-old who is eating from the sugar bowl. Because the parasites in their body are asking them to consume those foods, because that's what they need to thrive and grow. And so we've got all of these complexities that are happening when we make dietary changes. We've got all these things that can often be working against us. And that's where just picking a dietary program and going with it is not always the best solution to create the health that you want to be creating, because there's lots of little aspects to think about. And sometimes you just need somebody to talk to you through them, talk to you as you're processing that stuff and going, oh, hang on, no, that's the parasites telling you to go eat that food. Embrace. Tell them no. Do the things that are going to actually counteract them by putting in probiotics, eating fermented vegetables, all of that type of stuff, so that you're feeding yourself up and you're feeding your body with the things that it actually needs to counteract what's going on. So we've got the messaging, we've got the parasites that are taking place, we've got all of that type of stuff. The other thing is, if we've got a body that is not functioning well, like our gut isn't digesting the food that we're consuming that well, then what can also take place is this transition or chemical transition in the gut. So, for example, you've got somebody who's got a digestive system that isn't really working that well. Their microbiome is out of balance. They will put in sugar because they're attracted to it. The parasites are telling them to eat it. But what happens with that sugar is that sugar in the gut is converted to ethanol, because if we ferment sugar, we get alcohol. And so that's what happens in the gut. And so they end up getting a little bit of alcohol moving through their system as well. And there's, lots of research around those people who had that happen on a really extensive state, where they actually, were looked and perceived as if they were drunk, but they hadn't been drinking. And it's a whole phenomenon of being drunk on their own fermented juices, because their gut isn't functioning and it isn't working properly. The same happens on a slightly different pathway with things like gluten and casein. So both gluten and casein in a gut that doesn't function properly, that isn't doing what it's meant to be doing because it's unwell for all sorts of different reasons, the microbiome is out of balance, all of that type of stuff, a gut that isn't functioning really well, gluten and casein get turned into opioids. And they then give us that little bit of a high. And if you've ever had that experience where you've maybe eaten, say, something like a pavlova or a whole heap of bread or that type of stuff for your lunch, and then you feel like you have to have a nap, that's that process taking place. You're getting the alcohol and you're getting the opioids from that food, as opposed to any nutritional value. And when you think about this, for me, I think straight away, oh my God, what about the children? what's happening for the children. And if we're looking at kids who are, say, on the spectrum, kids who maybe have some behavioral stuff going on for them, they maybe have ADHD, that process, like if we understand that process of the food that we're putting in, because they often tend to be really fussy eaters too, and they really get drawn and attracted to the white foods, they become somewhat of a food addict with the white foods that are actually creating alcohol and opioids in their system. And I've had it for a number of clients where we've taken it away and it's almost like they're going through actual drug withdrawal. They're not from the point of view of like they've never used any drugs, but their bodies are going through that withdrawal of having that in their system that's spiking their adrenaline, that's actually keeping them going, and that cycle going around in their bodies. And so the gut-brain barrier and the axis involves all of that type of stuff, including how we think. So if we're thinking great thoughts, our biology is happier. If we're thinking sad thoughts, everything is more depressed and slowed down. So we speed things up by thinking healthy, happy thoughts. We slow it down by thinking, lots of negative thoughts. And that's where it's important for us to really focus in on what are the words that we're using? What are the messages that we're putting into our brain daily? What are the things and the stories that we're telling ourselves? And actually doing some of the emotional work and making ourselves accountable for what it is that we think and how we feed and nourish our brain. So by looking at the music that we're putting in, by looking at the news that we might be watching, or the television that we might be watching, or the shows that we might be watching, by actually bringing our conscious attention to those things and selecting to use stuff that's really going to be good and uplifting for us versus stuff that's going to make us depressed, because that has an implication as well on how we think about the world and how we think about ourselves in the world and what we're allowed to have and all of that type of stuff. So there's lots of complexities that go into really succeeding when it comes to health, and it's very rare that I'll have a client that only needs to focus on the food. That's a really rare situation. Occasionally I'll have somebody that only needs to focus on the food. Like they don't have a lot of the cultural stuff, they don't have a lot of the other stuff. They just actually need to know what foods are the right foods for their body, because maybe they've been told from all sorts of different criteria people that it needs to be this, that and the other, like 80% carbohydrate. I think it might even be 85% is the recommendation. It's definitely not what I recommend. And they just need to have that adjustment. They just need to have that, direction. That's probably 1 out of 10 people that I work with when it comes to dietary changes. Majority of the people that I work with that have some dietary changes that need to make place for them to be healthy and well, they also have to do some of the emotional work, and it's by removing the food or changing the food that they actually start to suddenly see what the food was hiding, what the food was actually masking, and that they weren't looking at because they were using food as their pacifier, the thing that would be their emotional pacifier. So, any questions? Let me know. I think it's a really good time of the year to start thinking about this and start thinking about, how do I want my 2021 to be when it comes to the food that I'm going to be putting in my body, how I'm going to support it, because we can't control everything in the year. We're not going to be able to control all of this stuff, and the things that we can control are ourselves. The things that we can focus on are ourselves, and that's where we want to put our attention of who am I going to be in 2021? How am I going to respond to things in 2021? Do I need to be in peak performance so that I'm looking after myself and not relying on the medical system for 2021? Do I want to not have to go to a hospital if I can absolutely avoid it? Do I want to be the person who's doing everything I can to make sure that my health is on point and I'm not, having to rely on the system if I don't have to, that it's only for emergencies that I need to rely on that system? Is that part of your goal for 2021? All of that is about working on self. It's about deciding who I'm going to be, how I'm going to do it, what I'm going to focus on, how I'm going to respond, and actually clear the muck that's inside of me. So I want to use that to invite you to come and join me for the wellness upgrade. If you are in a space of, I really just want to start it and start moving in the direction, I'm not yet fully committed. I just want to start knowing what are the foods that I should eat for my body, how should I look after it, those types of things. Then the wellness upgrade is for you. We have one naturopathic session where I do your eyes, tongue, nails analysis, all of that, health history, etc. We run a hair test and we find out what foods are problematic for you, and we have a follow-up session with that, and then we have a coaching session, so you can get a little bit of a taster of what it's like to actually work on the emotional stuff that's driving the food choices that you make. That's the wellness upgrade. If you're ready to go, no, I'm actually just ready for making 2021 it. I'm done with playing around. I'm done with messing around with different diets. I'm actually ready just to know exactly what it is that I need to do. Be supported emotionally as I move through those things. If that's you, then that's you. You want to message me about my 12-week GAPS program. So we start with 12 weeks, we get you up and running, and then you see what level of support you need after that. So I've got those two offerings to help with dietary programming and starting to make the change. You can still also jump into Divinely Nourished. We're on week 5 at the moment, so there's time to catch up before we get too close to the finish line, but you're welcome to come and join that as well. If any of those things are of interest to you, send me a message. I'll happily just forward you the link so you can come and join, or we can have a chat about them. All right, I've got a client that I've got to get off to, so I'm going to say goodbye to you. Thank you for joining me for today, and I hope you have the most amazing day. Happy New Year to all of you, and I pray that much of your desires come true this year. Bye for now. See you later.